secondly, that amongst the Republican models, the one that has just got 73 votes is clearly preferred. Now, when you bind those two together, it would be a travesty in common sense terms of Australian democracy for that proposition not to be put to the Australian people.
This was the best republic that the best brains of the Republican movement could come up with, and it could only get 45% support, and that is a credit to the healthy scepticism of the Australian people when faced with change for change's sake and a dud model republic.
Do you think, and this is my seventh question, do you think that the process that the Republicans have proposed seems to be supported by them and the Labor Party, of having at least two plebiscites before you have a referendum? That is, you have a first plebiscite where you ask, do you want a republic? Which I think is vandalistic, because you then leave, if it were to pass, you'd leave the country in the situation of voting no confidence in the Constitution and having nothing to replace it. A second question, a second plebiscite on a model, and then finally the referendum. Does this indicate that they think they would lose a referendum?
I think it certainly indicates that, and it's a process which is designed to maximise the possibility of achieving a change. The hope is that people would say, oh, it's not a bad idea to have a republic, and in the knowledge that their first vote was not going to be final. A majority might vote for that. Might. Not necessarily. It would depend on the strength of the No campaign. But in the end, you have to put forward, as I said a moment ago, you have to put forward an alternative. And the alternative has to be a clear-cut model. And that is what should be put. And you can't amend the Constitution by some kind of populist plebiscite.
Do you see a danger then in that first plebiscite of leaving the country up in the air?
Well, certainly the idea that you could end up with a position where a small majority of people voted for a republic, but there's a bit of disagreement amongst them as to what kind of republic. Then you have a vote on the model, and you don't get a clear result out of that, and then you'll have endless debate as to which of those two referenda should be given greater force. It comes back to what was faced in 1999. People wanted a republic. You tested opinion as to what kind of Republican proposal enjoyed the majority support, and that was put, and it was defeated. Now, I would say to those in the community who want the issue revisited, you're wasting your time in current circumstances, but if you must, you have to argue what kind of model you want. And the first and most obvious thing that has to be resolved is whether you're arguing for a directly elected president or somebody who is essentially a Governor-General by another name.
Michael Kirby made the point in the Charter of Australia's a constitutional monarchy, and I think you agree with us, that many would regard us as already having all the advantages of both a constitutional monarchy and a republican form of government. We're a crowned republic. Do you foresee this arising again as a referendum in the future?
I don't think it will arise in my lifetime, and I hope to be around for a while yet, but I don't think it will, but I could be wrong. There is absolutely no groundswell of support for a change. The Queen is enjoying enormous respect. Her position and the level of respect for her in the Australian community is widespread, and it's very deep. And as the years have gone by, the last 20 years, her position is strengthened. But, as I said a moment ago, it's a democratic choice by the Australian people. She's not there by right, she's there by consent, by choice, by acclamation, so to speak. Now that could change. I don't see that happening. But those who want change have got to articulate the form of the model they want as a republic to replace them. They have this fearful difficulty that the nature of the Australian public is that you're going to elect this person to be president. A growing number of people say, well, we've got to have a say in it. But equally, people see the danger, indeed the folly of changing a very stable system. But that is an issue for people who hold a different view on the subject than I do.
We see the dangers of changing systems in the United Kingdom, don't we, where, you know, the fixed term election.
Yeah, well, that was a product, of course, of the ambiguous result in the 2010 election. Certainly, that was an error, but it was the price that had to be paid in order to see the Liberal Democrats support the Conservatives in a coalition government.
So it points to the advantage of having a written constitution, which is rather difficult to change.
A different history. We had to have a written constitution because, above all else, the Australian Constitution is a document that prescribes the respective powers of the Commonwealth and the states. When you read the Constitution, that is the overwhelming import. There are other things, but it's certainly not a Bill of Rights, and heaven forbid it should ever become one.
I think the wonderful thing in the Constitution Act, is the preamble where it says, whereas the people of the several states, humbly relying on the blessings of Almighty God, have agreed to unite.
That's right.
I think that is a wonderful statement.
Well, that was the preamble that expressed the views of people at the time. And the other thing that should be remembered to those who still hanker after some conspiracy theory about the events of 1975 was the clear placement under our Constitution of the powers of the monarch, apart from the appointment of Governor-General, in the hands of the Governor-General. Governor-General of Australia has very clear power to exercise the authority of the Crown, and that was laid out in stark terms in the Constitution.
That Constitution then was revolutionary, at least in two respects. First, in giving the executive powers directly under the Constitution, the Governor-General, which was not the case in Canada. And the second thing, allowing the Australian people and Parliament to change the Constitution without going back to Westminster. Those were very novel things to do.
Well, the other thing that was very important to remember is that the Australian people voted for it. In fact, they voted directly for it. In that sense, it was even, I think, more democratic than the American Constitution.
Oh yes, they were by conventions.
By conventions, admittedly the conventions were elected bodies.
Yes, it was a remarkable and advanced constitution. We should never forget that.
No.